Behold 2020, and also Daddy Sihix, who asks, in several patch notes recently, Kuva Liches were barely mentioned, despite being released just this past October. What do you think about that? Well, I don't think a lot about that, to be honest with you. I feel like there's the only thing that is happening there is that Kuva Liches are kind of finished-ish as a piece of content on their own, but Railjack is not. Railjack is not really released yet. We can play it, but it's not really done, and I think it's more useful to think of it as they had to put out Railjack when they did for marketing and winter competition purposes. They had to put something on the table. Railjack was not done, but it doesn't matter. They just had to put something on the table, so they did. But Railjack isn't done, so now they're finishing it, and then it will actually be like released. At some point in the next couple months, it will kind of actually be done. It's really getting there pretty quickly already, now that they're patching it more. And once they're done with that, then I'm sure they will turn their attention back to the things they've been saying they want to work on. I don't think that's lip service. I think they very clearly know that these pieces of content are not ideal, and they want to work on them more. They just can't because they're still developing Railjack. They mentioned that they really bit off a lot more than they could chew with Railjack. It's the kind of thing where they had this idea, and it's an awesome idea, and it just snowballed to infinity. And they started coming up with more and more and more and more stuff, and it had idea creep, or whatever you want to call it. And here we are. It's been like 2+ years, and it's kind of not done, but we do have it playable. And I mean, they've been doing stuff that whole time. One of the things that's been the most annoying to me as a creator making Warframe stuff and enjoying this game for the past couple of years is that people constantly feel the need, not everyone, but many people still, feel the need to constantly point out that Railjack has like been in development for 2 years as though nothing else has happened in that time. Like we've gotten a steady stream of content during that time. It might not have felt satisfying to you, but it did to me. And objectively, if you look at the amount of patch notes, anyway, I'm preaching to the choir here, but like there have been plenty of things that have come out in that time, and the reason Railjack hasn't come out up until now and is not really out now in a way is because it had this idea creep problem. So the main answer I would give you is that they haven't been neglecting liches. Don't worry about it. But I also thought we would talk a little bit about how Railjack is intended to be a hub, and so I think a lot of us imagined that Kuva Liches would come out with Railjack. It was a Railjack-like feature, and one of the boss type of enemies you'd fight would be your Kuva Lich on a ship. What I'm imagining is that that ship will like warp into the system, similar to the way that Kuva Liches will ambush you in, Kuva Lich missions. Possibly not even in a mission specifically for a Kuva Lich. Maybe they'll just sometimes appear in a Railjack mission. That's what I had imagined. That's what it seems like they're going to do still eventually. We'll get to that in a sec. But they chose to release Kuva Liches separately, not as part of the Railjack system. We thought it was going to be part of Empyrean, but it wasn't, directly. But the thing is, the whole point of Empyrean, like what Empyrean is trying to use Railjack content as a hub, like a way to connect things up. A way where you prepare your Warframe, you got your agent, and then the real mission you're doing is not just one little corridor in a planet, but like you're in a battleship, and doing the new war, going to war, and as the idea being that it is the culmination of every system in the game, where you have Arcwing and focus abilities and your weapons and your Warframe and etc. And then you finally have your Railjack, and that's where the magic happens. But it's not there yet. That idea is what Empyrean actually is. So the idea of developing Kuva Liches as like a thing and then plugging them into Empyrean later makes a lot of sense from a development perspective. Once Railjack is a good infrastructure, which is all it's intended to be from their stated design goals, then we can plug the rest of the game into it, and that's when it will get really good, because it's sort of not, in my mind, it's not ideal to have Railjack just be this totally separate mode, and I think the reason it feels like that is because it's currently not really connected to the rest of the game. They haven't plugged it in yet to the other systems, and once they do, that will very likely be when Kuva Liches get their revisions. So what I'm imagining is that for the next month or two, they're going to fix up Railjack and get it to a state where as an infrastructure, it's done and actually released sometime soon. You could argue now, I don't know. You get the idea. And then maybe in April, March, I don't know, they will plug Kuva Liches into that system. We'll get Kuva Lich fights in space on ships, and that is when Kuva Liches will get revised. They'll plug something else in, and that thing will get revised as it gets plugged in, etc., etc. So that's what I'm imagining. They did not really neglect Kuva Liches. It's just the Railjack is literally not done. Like it's confusing because it is released, but I think the most useful way to think about it is that Railjack is actually not out. It actually has not been released. And so, of course, they're not going to go work on Kuva Liches more until the thing they've been waiting to deliver for like 2 years is, actually released. Again, it is technically out in the most unhelpful way possible. But for a lot of the time that Railjack has been released for the past couple of months, month or two, month and a half, it has been literally, or at least mostly, unplayable. So it really isn't out yet, I don't think that it's a hard sell. I hope it's not a hard sell to think of it that way. So I hope that helps. I hope that's a useful way to think about it. I also do think that January, which is a month that I've been taking a lot of time off to heal and stuff, is a good time to take some space away from the game because our developers take a lot of January off. They really have hit the ground running. There have been a lot of patch notes, a lot of fixes, but at the same time, it's not a bad time to step away a little bit. The beginning half of the year is almost always fixing the game up overall and following up releases that happened in the latter half of the year, and then the latter half of the year is TennoCon, and then we get our Haymaker releases, which this year, in 2019, this past year, were very late. They were really, really late. They were, first we got Plains of Eidolon, which was in like September, if I recall. Might have been October. I think it was September. And then Fortuna was a little later, like October, if I recall. Maybe November, and I'm just not remembering. But, whereas this year, like Railjack was just in the nick of time before the end of the year, But we did get a lot of other major things that would usually be the kind of thing we would get during the beginning of the year last year. So in, mid 2019, mid to late 2019, we got Melee 3.0, basically. We don't have the rage mode system, but we have a very significant change and overhaul to Melee. That is something that would normally be the kind of thing they'd put out in the beginning of the year, not in the end of the year. So that's on balance, it was still a lot of stuff, but the truth is the Railjack really isn't done. Anyway, that was me rambling about why I don't think that absence of Kuva Lich changes really matters at the moment. It's not something that I would be willing to ignore forever. There definitely is some concern that they might not come back to it at all, but they've done a pretty good job. I heard some people complain, I think pretty justifiably, like a year ago, that a lot of game modes just get abandoned, but I don't really think that's true anymore. I feel like they have done a good job revisiting most, and they're getting there to the other ones. We had arbitrations get revisited a bit. The reward structure got revisited a few times, which is good. I think it's in a much better place now. ESO needs to be revisited, but they did say that's the drop table they want to rebalance next. So probably beginning of this year, I would think. This is when they normally do that stuff. There are like a few frames, mostly Valkyra, have been saying that I think need a rework from a gameplay perspective, but they've done a pretty good job revisiting almost every frame and making sure they're all good, and we're finally at the point where they're all good enough. It's just that some of them still don't feel amazing to play, maybe, or don't really do much, but they're all good, so that problem is solved. So that's a pretty decent achievement, making it that, when I started playing Warframe, there was like half of the frames. It was like, who cares? Like, why does this exist? And almost all of them have been reworked or are contextually okay now. Spore Saren was a frame that was maybe less exciting when I started playing, but is now just ooh, maybe even a little bit too strong in ESO anyway. Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, I do think that progression, that way of thinking about the game where they are revisiting stuff is something you should consider. They really have been, think about the beginning of this year and think about what you want them to touch. And then at the end of the year, have they touched on that stuff? And I feel like when I thought about that at the beginning of last year, they mostly did touch on the stuff I wanted them. There could be more, sure. But Melee was the biggest one. And then I wanted Sentinel Ribbons to get re-implemented somewhere good. And they did that. We got Railjack in some form. I don't think it's good that they released it early, but what are you going to do? Anyway, all right. That's I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for your support, Daddy Sihix.